The council chamber of the Valorian Galactic Empire was the largest room ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Its walls were made of pure crystal that had been mined from dying stars. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. 10,000 delegates from 1,000 conquered worlds sat in floating chairs that circled the central platform where Emperor Xyraxis stood. The emperor was tall, even by Valorian standards. His skin was the color of dark purple, and his 4 eyes glowed with a soft, golden light. He had ruled the empire for 300 years, and in that time, he had never lost a war. He had never even come close to losing a war. The Valorian Empire was the most powerful force in the galaxy, and everyone knew it. Today, he was about to declare war on a new species. A small, weak species from a tiny planet near the edge of the galaxy. They called themselves humans, delegates of the Empire, Xyraxis said, his voice echoing through the massive chamber. 6 months ago, our scouts discovered a new world, a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The creatures who live there are primitive. They have only recently learned to travel beyond their own moon. They possess no shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light communication. They are, by every measure, inferior to us. The delegates murmured in agreement. They had heard this speech many times before. It always ended the same way. We offered them the honor of joining our empire, Xyraxis continued. We offered them protection, technology, and a place among the stars. In return, we asked only for their loyalty and their resources. It was a generous offer, more generous than we have ever given to any species. He paused for effect. His 4 eyes scanned the room. They refused. Gasps filled the chamber. Refusing the empire was unthinkable. It was also, historically speaking, very stupid. Not only did they refuse, Xyraxis said, his voice growing cold, but they did so with insults. They told our ambassador that Earth, as they call their world, does not bow to anyone. They said they would rather die standing than live on their knees. He let the words hang in the air for a long moment. So be it. Today, I declare war on the human species. We will teach them what it means to defy the Valorian Empire. We will burn their cities, enslave their people, and add their world to our collection. This war will be swift. It will be brutal, and it will serve as a reminder to every species in the galaxy that resistance is foolish. The delegates erupted in cheers. War was always good for the Empire. It brought new resources, new slaves, and new glory. This war against the primitive humans would be the easiest conquest in Valorian history. But not everyone in the chamber was cheering. In the far corner of the room, in a small seat reserved for observers from unconquered worlds, sat a single human. His name was Daniel Briggs, and he was humanity's ambassador to the Empire. He was not a tall man. He was not particularly muscular. He had short brown hair that was starting to turn gray at the edges, and he wore a simple black suit that looked very plain compared to the elaborate robes of the alien delegates. He did not look scared. He did not look angry. He did not even look particularly interested. When the cheers died down, Emperor Xyraxis turned his attention to the human ambassador. He expected to see fear. He expected to see desperation. Perhaps the human would beg for mercy now that he understood the full power of the Empire. Instead, Daniel Briggs reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folded newspaper. The chamber fell silent. 10,000 delegates watched in confusion as the human calmly opened the newspaper and began to read. Ambassador Briggs, Xyraxis said, his voice sharp with irritation. Did you not hear my declaration? I have just announced the destruction of your species. Do you have nothing to say? Daniel looked up from his newspaper. He seemed almost surprised that anyone was talking to him. Oh, sorry about that, he said in a casual tone. I wanted to check if the Cubs won last night. It was a big game. He glanced at the paper and smiled. They did, by the way. 7-3. The alien delegates exchanged confused looks. What was a Cub? What did winning have to do with anything? Was this human insane? Ambassador, Zyraxis said slowly. I have just declared war on your planet. 12,000 warships will soon be heading toward your world. 3 billion soldiers will land on your soil. Your cities will burn. Your people will die. Does this mean nothing to you? Daniel folded his newspaper and tucked it back into his briefcase. He stood up from his chair and straightened his tie. Then he looked directly at the Emperor, with an expression that was almost bored. With all due respect, Your Majesty, Daniel said. You have no idea what you have just done. The chamber was silent. No one had ever spoken to the Emperor in such a tone. We have conquered 47 species, Zyraxis said coldly. We have destroyed worlds. We have built an empire that spans a quarter of the galaxy. What makes you think your primitive planet is any different? Daniel smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that no one else in the room knew. Those 47 species, Daniel said. How many of them had ever fought a real war before you arrived? How many of them had nuclear weapons? Chemical weapons? Biological weapons? How many of them had spent their entire history killing each other in creative and horrifying ways? He paused to let the questions sink in. Humanity has been at war with itself since the first caveman picked up a rock and hit another caveman with it. We have spent 10,000 years developing better and more efficient ways to destroy each other. We have survived plagues, famines, and conflicts that killed hundreds of millions of our own people. And we are still here. Daniel picked up his briefcase and began walking toward the exit. You think you are declaring war on a primitive species, he said over his shoulder. What you have actually done is wake up a predator that has been sleeping for a very long time. He stopped at the door and looked back at the Emperor one last time. Good luck. You are going to need it. Then he walked out of the chamber, leaving 10,000 confused delegates and one very angry Emperor behind. In the silence that followed, no one knew quite what to say. Finally, one of the Valorian generals spoke up. He is bluffing, the general said. The humans have no real weapons. Our victory is assured. Emperor Zyraxis nodded slowly. Of course, he said. Begin the invasion at once. But somewhere deep in his mind, a small voice whispered a question he could not ignore. What if the human was telling the truth? Admiral Keth Oren stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched as the invasion fleet assembled around him. 12,000 warships hung in the darkness of space like a swarm of angry insects. Each ship was massive, covered in armor that could withstand direct hits from nuclear weapons. Each ship carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. This was the largest fleet in the history of the Valorian Empire. It was also, in Keth Oren's opinion, complete overkill. The humans were a primitive species. Their entire military consisted of a few hundred ships that could barely travel faster than light. Their weapons were crude chemical explosives and simple kinetic projectiles. They had no shields, no plasma cannons, no gravity bombs. By every measure, they were hopelessly outmatched. Keth Oren had conquered 11 species in his long career. He expected this conquest to be the easiest of them all. Admiral, one of his officers said, the fleet is ready. All ships report optimal status. We can begin the jump to the human system on your command. Keth Oren nodded slowly. How long until we reach their world? Approximately 4 standard days, sir. We will emerge from hyperspace near their 4th planet, the one they call Mars. From there, it is a short journey to their home world. And what resistance can we expect? The officer pulled up a holographic display showing Earth and its surrounding space. Very little, sir. Intelligence reports indicate that the humans have approximately 300 combat vessels. Most of these are small patrol ships with minimal armament. They have a few orbital defense platforms, but nothing that can threaten our fleet. Keth Oren smiled. 300 ships against 12,000. It would not even be a battle. It would be an execution. Very well, he said. Give the order. We jump in 1 hour. The officer saluted and hurried away to relay the command. Keth Oren turned back to the viewport and stared at the stars. In a few days, He would add another world to the Empire's collection, another easy victory, another step toward galactic domination. He had no idea how wrong he was. 12,000 light-years away, on a small blue planet called Earth, a very different meeting was taking place. The war room beneath the Pentagon was crowded. Generals, admirals, and senior officials from every branch of the military sat around a massive table. Screens on every wall showed satellite images, fleet positions, and threat assessments. The mood in the room was tense, but not panicked. Secretary of Defense Laura Hendricks stood at the head of the table. She was a tall woman in her early 60s, with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had served in the military for 30 years before moving into politics, and she had seen more combat than most of the people in the room combined. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I assume everyone has been briefed on the situation. The Valorian Empire has declared war on humanity. An invasion fleet of approximately 12,000 ships is currently assembling. They will be here within 1 week." She let the number sink in. 12,000 ships. It was an overwhelming force. "Our current fleet strength is 322 combat vessels," she continued. "We have 47 orbital defense platforms and approximately 200 ground-based missile batteries. On paper, we are hopelessly outmatched." General Kevin Price leaned back in his chair. He was a large man with a thick gray beard and a reputation for unconventional thinking. Unlike many of his colleagues, he did not look worried. In fact, he was smiling. "Ma'am," he said, "with all due respect, those numbers do not tell the whole story." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Kevin stood up and walked to one of the screens. He pulled up an image of the solar system. "The Valorians have never fought a species like us," he said. "Every other species they conquered surrendered after the first battle. They have no experience fighting a prolonged war against an enemy that refuses to give up." He pointed to the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. "For the past 50 years, we have been preparing for exactly this scenario. We knew that sooner or later, we would encounter a hostile alien species. So we built defenses. Lots of defenses. Hidden defenses." He zoomed in on the asteroid belt. What looked like ordinary rocks were actually disguised weapons platforms. There are 8,000 autonomous weapons stations hidden in that asteroid belt. Each one is equipped with nuclear missiles, kinetic impactors, and electromagnetic pulse devices. The Valorians will have to pass through that belt to reach Earth. When they do, they will lose at least a third of their fleet before they even know they are under attack. Laura nodded slowly. "What else?" "Mines," Kevin said. "Thousands of them, scattered throughout the solar system. Stealth drones programmed to ram enemy ships at high speed. Communication jammers that will disrupt their command structure. Biological agents designed to target Valorian physiology." He turned to face the room. "The Valorians think they are invading a primitive planet. What they are actually entering is the most heavily fortified star system in the galaxy. We have spent our entire history fighting each other. We know how to wage war better than any species they have ever encountered." Laura considered this for a long moment. Then she looked around the room. "What is our strategy?" she asked. Another officer stood up. Her name was Commander Lisa Novak, and she was in charge of tactical operations. She was young for her position, only 35, but she had proven herself in multiple conflicts. "We do not try to meet them in open battle," Lisa said. "That would be stupid. Instead, we make them bleed for every kilometer of space. We hit them from angles they do not expect. We use tactics they have never seen before." She pulled up a simulation on the main screen. Phase 1. Let them enter the asteroid belt. When they do, we activate the hidden weapons platforms. Phase 2. As they regroup from the initial attack, we hit them with stealth drones and mines. Phase 3. When they finally reach Earth orbit, we engage with our main fleet while ground-based missiles target their command ships. She paused and looked at Laura. "They have numbers. But we have something better. We have 10,000 years of experience killing things that try to kill us." Laura allowed herself a small smile. "Then let us show these aliens what humanity is capable of," she said. Begin all preparations immediately. We have 1 week to get ready for war. As the meeting broke up and officers hurried to their posts, Kevin Price lingered behind. He walked over to a window that looked out at the night sky. Somewhere out there, 12,000 enemy ships were heading toward Earth. Any other species would have been terrified. But Kevin was not any other species. He was human. And humans did not know how to be afraid of a fight. "Come on then," he whispered to the stars. "We have been waiting for something like this for a very long time." Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out. Soldiers prepared their weapons. Pilots checked their ships. Scientists worked around the clock to develop new countermeasures. Civilians were evacuated to underground shelters that had been built decades ago for exactly this purpose. Humanity was not panicking. Humanity was getting ready. And for the first time in their history, all of humanity was united against a common enemy. The Valorians had no idea what they were about to face. The Valorian invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace in a flash of blue light. 12,000 warships materialized near Mars, their massive hulls blocking out the stars. Admiral Keth Oren stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the red planet through the viewport. It was smaller than he expected. The entire human solar system seemed small and fragile, compared to the mighty worlds of the Valorian Empire. This conquest would be easy. He was certain of it. "Admiral," his sensor officer reported, "scans complete. No enemy vessels detected in the immediate area. The human fleet appears to be concentrated near their home world." Keth Oren nodded. "As expected, they are probably cowering behind their primitive defenses, hoping we will show mercy." He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the human planet. Let them hear the voice of their conqueror." The officer worked the controls. A moment later, a light on the console turned green. "Channel open, Admiral." Keth Oren cleared his throat and spoke in the formal tone he always used when addressing inferior species. "People of Earth, I am Admiral Keth Oren of the Valorian Empire. Your leaders have foolishly rejected our generous offer of peace. Now you will face the consequences. Surrender immediately, and we will spare your lives. Resist, and you will be destroyed. You have 1 hour to respond." He cut the channel and smiled. In his experience, this speech always worked. Primitive species were quick to surrender when they saw the size of the invasion fleet. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. Then an hour. No response came. Keth Oren frowned. "Perhaps their communication systems are too primitive to receive our message. No matter. We will deliver our ultimatum in person." He turned to his fleet commander. "Begin the advance toward Earth. Standard formation. We will show these humans the full might of the Empire." The fleet began to move. 12,000 ships formed a massive wedge shape and headed deeper into the solar system. They passed Mars and headed toward the asteroid belt that lay between the red planet and the human homeworld. It was the last mistake Admiral Keth Oren would ever make. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains on Earth, Commander Lisa Novak sat in a command bunker surrounded by screens and control panels. 50 officers worked at stations around her, monitoring every aspect of the battle that was about to begin. "Ma'am," one of her officers said, "the Valorian fleet has entered the asteroid belt." Lisa looked at the main screen. It showed thousands of red dots, moving through a field of gray shapes that represented asteroids. The enemy fleet was advancing in a perfect formation, completely unaware of what was waiting for them. "How many weapons platforms are in range?" she asked. 8,200, ma'am. All systems are armed and ready." Lisa took a deep breath. This was the moment they had prepared for. Decades of planning and construction were about to be put to the test. "Activate all platforms," she said. "Fire at will." The asteroid belt came alive. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Keth Oren was reviewing invasion plans when alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed across every console. Officers shouted in confusion. "What is happening?" he demanded. "Admiral!" the sensor officer cried, his voice filled with panic. "Multiple contacts. Thousands of them. They were hidden in the asteroids." Keth Oren looked at the tactical display and felt his blood turn cold. What had appeared to be ordinary rocks were now revealing themselves to be weapons platforms. Missiles were launching from every direction. Thousands of missiles. Tens of thousands of missiles. "Shields up," he shouted. "Return fire. Target those platforms." But it was already too late. The first wave of missiles struck the leading ships of the fleet. Nuclear explosions bloomed in the darkness of space, each one bright enough to blind sensors for kilometers around. Ships that had survived 100 battles were torn apart in seconds. Valorian soldiers who had never known fear screamed as their vessels disintegrated around them. And the missiles kept coming. In her bunker on Earth, Lisa watched the battle unfold on her screens. Red dots were disappearing by the dozen as human weapons found their targets. The Valorian fleet, which had entered the asteroid belt in perfect formation, was now scattered and confused. "They came in a straight line," she observed to her team. "Who does that? Did they really think we would not prepare any defenses?" One of her officers laughed nervously. "I do not think they expected this, ma'am." "No," Lisa agreed. "I do not think they did." Back in the asteroid belt, Admiral Kethoran was trying desperately to regain control of the situation. His fleet was taking heavy losses. Ships were exploding all around him. Communications were jammed by some kind of electromagnetic interference. "Admiral," his second-in-command shouted, "we have lost contact with over 200 ships. Our formation is breaking apart. Reform the fleet." Kethoran ordered. "Pull back beyond the asteroid belt. We need to regroup." The Valorian ships began to retreat, but as they did, new threats emerged. Stealth drones that had been drifting silently in space suddenly activated their engines and rammed into the fleeing vessels at high speed. Each drone was packed with explosives. Each impact destroyed or crippled another ship. Then came the mines. Thousands of them, hidden among the debris of destroyed vessels. Ships that had survived the missile barrage ran directly into invisible death traps. More explosions. More screaming. More chaos. By the time the Valorian fleet finally escaped the asteroid belt, they had lost nearly 3,000 ships. A quarter of the mighty invasion force had been destroyed before they even reached Earth. Admiral Kethoran stood on his bridge and stared at the tactical display in disbelief. This was not possible. No primitive species could inflict such losses on a Valorian fleet. It simply could not happen. But it had happened. "Admiral," one of his officers said quietly, "what are your orders?" Kethoran was silent for a long moment. He thought about retreating. He thought about calling for reinforcements. He thought about the shame of reporting this disaster to Emperor Xyraxis. In the end, pride won over wisdom. "Continue the advance," he said through gritted teeth. "We still outnumber them. We will crush these humans and make them pay for every ship we have lost." The remaining 9,000 ships reformed and headed toward Earth. They moved more carefully now, spreading out to avoid being caught in another trap. But the damage had been done. The Valorians had learned their first lesson about fighting humans. They had learned that humans did not fight fair. In her bunker, Lisa received reports from observation posts throughout the solar system. The enemy fleet was continuing its advance, but their formation was looser now. They were scared. "Phase 1 complete," she said. "They lost approximately 3,000 ships. That is better than we expected." "What now, ma'am?" an officer asked. Lisa smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Now we move to Phase 2, she said. "Let them think the worst is over. Let them get comfortable. And then we hit them again." She turned back to her screens and watched the red dots moving toward Earth. "They have no idea what they are walking into," she said softly. "But they are about to find out." The Valorian fleet reached Earth orbit 2 days later. They had lost another 500 ships to scattered mines and drone attacks along the way. Admiral Kethoran no longer felt confident. He no longer felt invincible, but he was still determined to complete his mission. 8,500 ships now hung above the blue planet. It was still an overwhelming force. Still enough to conquer any world. At least, that was what Kethoran told himself. He opened a channel to the planet below. "People of Earth," he said, his voice harsh with anger. "You have killed thousands of my soldiers with your cowardly traps and hidden weapons. This ends now. Surrender immediately, or I will burn every city on your planet to ashes. You have 30 minutes to respond. The response came almost immediately, but it was not what he expected. A face appeared on his view screen. It was a human male, perhaps 40 years old, with dark skin and close-cropped hair. He wore a military uniform and sat in what appeared to be the command chair of a warship. "This is Captain Andrew Delgado of the carrier Defiance," the human said. "I am authorized to speak on behalf of the Human Defense Forces." Kethoran leaned forward. "Then speak. Tell me you surrender." Andrew smiled. It was the same kind of smile that Ambassador Briggs had worn in the Imperial Council chamber. The smile of someone who knew something his enemy did not. "You want Earth?" Andrew said. "Come and take it." The channel went dead. Kethoran stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then he turned to his officers with rage burning in his eyes. "Launch all fighters," he commanded. "Begin orbital bombardment of their major cities. Send in the ground troops. I want this planet crushed within the hour." What followed was a battle unlike anything the Valorians had ever experienced. The human fleet was small, only 300 ships against 8,500. By every logical calculation, they should have been destroyed in minutes. But the humans did not fight by logic. Captain Andrew Delgado led the first attack personally. His carrier, the Defiance, launched wave after wave of small fighter craft that swarmed around the larger Valorian vessels like angry insects. The fighters were too fast and too small to hit with the Empire's heavy weapons. They darted in, fired their missiles, and disappeared before the Valorians could respond. When Valorian fighters launched to counter the attack, they found themselves facing pilots who flew with suicidal aggression. Human pilots rammed their damaged craft into enemy ships. They flew directly into weapons fire to deliver their payloads. They died by the hundreds, but each death took Valorian ships with it. "They are insane," one Valorian officer whispered as he watched the battle unfold. "They do not seem to care if they die." "No," Kethoran said quietly. "They care, but they care about winning more." On the ground, things were even worse for the invaders. Valorian troop transports descended through Earth's atmosphere, landing in fields and parking lots and empty streets. 3 billion soldiers poured out of the vessels, ready to conquer a primitive species. They found hell waiting for them. Every city had been turned into a fortress. Buildings were rigged with explosives. Streets were lined with mines. Snipers waited on rooftops. Underground tunnels connected defensive positions that the Valorians could not see on their sensors. General Kevin Price commanded the ground defense from a mobile headquarters that stayed constantly on the move. He watched reports flood in from every continent. "They landed in Chicago," one of his officers reported. "Our forces are engaging." Kevin nodded. "Show me." The screen displayed video from a camera drone flying over the city. Valorian soldiers were advancing down a main street in tight formation, just as they had been trained. Suddenly, the buildings on either side of the street collapsed, burying hundreds of soldiers under tons of rubble. The survivors tried to retreat, but more explosions blocked their path. Then the human soldiers emerged from hidden positions and opened fire. "They are panicking," Kevin observed. "They have never faced anything like this before." Similar scenes played out across the planet. In the forests of Germany, Valorian soldiers were hunted by small groups of special forces who appeared out of nowhere, killed, and vanished into the trees. In the mountains of Japan, landslides triggered by buried explosives wiped out entire battalions. In the deserts of Africa, sandstorms concealed human tanks that struck from every direction before disappearing again. The Valorians had expected a quick conquest. Instead, they were bleeding from 1,000 cuts. Dr. Michelle Grant was a military historian who had been embedded with the defense forces to document the campaign. She traveled between battlefields, recording everything she saw. One day, she found herself in a holding area where captured Valorian soldiers were being processed. One of the prisoners, an officer, sat alone in a corner. His purple skin was pale with shock. His 4 eyes stared at nothing. Michelle sat down across from him. "May I ask you some questions?" she said. The officer looked at her slowly. Why? So you can torture me for information? Michelle shook her head. We do not torture prisoners. It is against our rules of war. The officer laughed bitterly. Rules of war? You call what is happening out there following rules? You collapse buildings on soldiers. You use poison gas. You send your own pilots to die in suicide attacks. What kind of rules are those? Michelle considered the question for a moment. Let me explain something to you, she said. Humanity has been at war with itself for 10,000 years. Every generation has produced new weapons, new strategies, new horrors. We have killed hundreds of millions of our own people in wars. We have invented ways to destroy entire cities with a single bomb. We have created diseases in laboratories specifically designed to kill. She paused to let the words sink in. And all of that was against ourselves. Against people who looked like us, spoke like us, thought like us. We did all of those terrible things to our own brothers and sisters. The Valorian officer stared at her with growing horror. So, when you ask about our rules of war, Michelle continued, understand that we have already done things to each other that would make your species physically ill. What we are doing to you now is actually restrained by our standards. Why? The officer whispered. Why would you do such things to yourselves? Michelle thought about the question. It was a fair one. Humanity's violent history was difficult to explain to outsiders. Because we learned something important, she finally said. We learned that the only way to survive is to be more dangerous than whatever is trying to kill you. Your empire has conquered 47 species by being the biggest threat in the galaxy, but you have never faced a species that has spent its entire existence preparing for threats. She stood up and looked down at the broken officer. You made war into your tool for building an empire. We made war into an art form for survival. That is the difference between us. In orbit, the battle continued. The human fleet was taking losses, but so were the Valorians. And for every human ship that was destroyed, the crew seemed to fight even harder. Some captains deliberately rammed their crippled vessels into enemy flagships. Others detonated their reactors as final acts of defiance. Admiral Kethoran watched his fleet slowly crumble and realized the terrible truth that Ambassador Briggs had tried to tell him weeks ago. The humans were not primitive. The humans were predators. And he had just led his fleet into their hunting ground. By the end of the first day, the Valorians had lost another 2,000 ships in orbit and over 500 million soldiers on the ground. They had failed to capture a single major city. They had failed to break the human defenses anywhere, and the humans were still fighting, still laughing, still singing songs as they marched into battle. Kethoran finally understood what he was facing, but by then, it was far too late to save his fleet. 3 months after the invasion began, it was over. Admiral Kethoran was dead. His flagship had been destroyed in a desperate final battle above the Pacific Ocean. Of the 12,000 ships that had entered the human solar system, fewer than 800 managed to escape. Over 2 billion Valorian soldiers had been killed or captured on Earth's surface. The rest had retreated to their remaining vessels and fled back to Imperial space. It was the greatest military defeat in the history of the Valorian Empire. News of the disaster spread quickly across the galaxy. Species that had lived under Valorian rule for centuries heard whispers about the impossible victory. A primitive species from a small blue planet had destroyed the mighty invasion fleet. It seemed like a fantasy, like a story told to children. But it was true. On the Valorian homeworld, Emperor Xyraxis faced consequences he had never imagined. His people, who had always known victory, now knew defeat. His council, which had always obeyed him, now demanded answers. His generals, who had always praised his wisdom, now questioned his judgment. Within weeks of the fleet's return, Xyraxis was removed from power. The council declared him responsible for the failed invasion and stripped him of all titles and authority. A new ruling body was formed, one that was more cautious about declaring wars against unknown species. The first order of business for this new council was to negotiate peace with humanity. Ambassador Daniel Briggs returned to the Imperial Council chamber 3 months after he had walked out of it. The room looked different now. The floating chairs were fewer in number. The delegates were quieter. The atmosphere of supreme confidence had been replaced by something closer to fear. The new council leader, a female Valorian named Sithana, sat in what had been the Emperor's place. She watched the human ambassador approach the central platform with obvious nervousness. Daniel looked exactly as he had during the first meeting. Same simple black suit. Same calm expression. Same folded newspaper. Tucked under his arm, "Ambassador Briggs," Sithana said formally, "we have asked you here to discuss terms for ending the conflict between our peoples. The Council recognizes that the previous administration made a grave error in declaring war on your species. We are prepared to offer significant concessions to restore peace." Daniel nodded politely. "That is very reasonable of you. What do you propose?" Sithana took a deep breath. "We are prepared to offer a full military withdrawal from your solar system. We will return all prisoners of war without conditions. We will pay reparations for the damage caused by our invasion. And we will recognize human space as a sovereign territory, not subject to imperial law." It was an extraordinary offer. No species had ever received such terms from the Empire. Daniel considered the proposal for a moment. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out his newspaper. He unfolded it slowly and placed it on the table between himself and the council. "Before we discuss terms," he said, "I want to explain something. Something that will help you understand who you are dealing with." He pointed to the newspaper. "When Emperor Xyraxis declared war on humanity, I was reading this paper. Many of your delegates thought I was being disrespectful. Or perhaps they thought I was insane. The truth is much simpler." He looked up at the council members, meeting their eyes one by one. "I was not being disrespectful. I was genuinely more interested in a baseball game than in your declaration of war. Do you understand what that means? Your mighty empire, your 12,000 ships, your 3 billion soldiers, none of it scared me. None of it worried me, because I knew what you did not know." He paused. "I knew what humanity is capable of." The council chamber was silent. Every delegate hung on his words. "Let me tell you about my species," Daniel continued. "We have been fighting since we first learned to stand upright. We invented war before we invented writing. By the time we built our first cities, we had already developed sophisticated methods for destroying them." He began to pace slowly in front of the council platform. "We turned nuclear weapons on ourselves, twice. We killed millions of our own people in conflicts over land, resources, and ideas. We created biological weapons that could wipe out entire populations. We built machines specifically designed to cause maximum suffering." He stopped and turned to face the council. "And we did all of that to each other. To beings who looked like us, who spoke our languages, who shared our blood and our history. We did terrible, horrible things to our own brothers and sisters for thousands of years." Sithana shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Other council members looked pale. "So when you declared war on us," Daniel said, "you were not threatening a primitive species. You were threatening a species that has spent its entire existence preparing for exactly this kind of fight. You were poking a sleeping predator with a very short stick." He picked up the newspaper and held it in front of him. "This newspaper is a symbol. It represents everything you failed to understand about humanity. We were not ignoring your threat. We were simply not impressed by it. We have faced worse threats from ourselves." He tucked the newspaper back into his briefcase. "Now, about those peace terms." Daniel walked closer to the council platform. His voice became softer but somehow more dangerous. "We accept your offer of withdrawal, prisoner return, and reparations. But we have some additional requirements." He pulled out a small data pad and placed it on the table. "First, the Valorian Empire will share all of its advanced technology with humanity. Faster than light travel, energy weapons, shield technology, all of it. We will use this technology to protect ourselves and to explore the galaxy." Sithana hesitated. "That is a significant demand." "Second," Daniel continued as if she had not spoken, "the Empire will release any species that wishes to leave Imperial control. You have conquered 47 worlds. Any of those worlds that want independence will be granted it, with no interference from Imperial forces." The council members exchanged worried glances. This was far more than they had expected to give. And third, Daniel said, the Empire will issue a formal announcement to every species in the galaxy. The announcement will explain what happened here. It will explain that humanity defeated your invasion fleet, and it will include a warning. What kind of warning? Sathina asked. Daniel smiled. It was a friendly smile, but there was something behind it that made the council members shiver. The warning will say this: humanity desires peace. We will trade with any species that offers fair terms. We will help any species that asks for our assistance. We will be good neighbors in this galaxy. He paused. But if any species threatens us, if any empire points its weapons at our world, if any fleet enters our space with hostile intent, we will respond with everything we have. And we have a lot. He straightened his tie and picked up his briefcase. Do we have an agreement? Sathina looked around at her fellow council members. One by one, they nodded. They had no choice. Humanity had proven itself. The Empire could not afford another war with such a dangerous species. We agree, Sathina said quietly. Daniel nodded politely. Excellent. I am glad we could reach an understanding. He turned and walked toward the exit, just as he had done 3 months ago. But this time, he stopped at the door and looked back. One more thing, he said. In the future, when you encounter a new species, perhaps try asking nicely before you start threatening them. You might be surprised how well diplomacy works when war is not your first option. He tapped his newspaper against his palm. And if you ever feel tempted to threaten humanity again, just remember one thing. What is that? Sathina asked. Daniel smiled warmly. Let us finish our coffee first. We are much more reasonable after coffee. Then he walked out of the chamber, leaving the humbled council behind. In the years that followed, the Valorian Empire changed. It became less aggressive, more cautious about its expansion. The species it had conquered were given choices they had never had before. Some stayed in the Empire. Some left to find their own paths among the stars. And across the galaxy, a new saying emerged. When young officers were promoted to command, when diplomats were sent to negotiate with unknown species, when explorers discovered new worlds, their elders would give them the same advice. Let the humans read their newspapers in peace. It was good advice. Very few species were foolish enough to ignore it. Humanity spread out among the stars, not as conquerors but as explorers and traders. They made friends with dozens of species. They helped build alliances that brought peace to sectors that had known only war. They used their talent for conflict to protect the weak instead of oppressing them. And sometimes, late at night, when the stars were bright and the galaxy was quiet, old soldiers would gather in bars and tell stories about the war, about the day the Empire came to Earth, about the impossible victory that changed everything. They would raise their glasses and toast to the men and women who had fought and died. And they would remember the lesson they had taught the galaxy. Never underestimate humans, never threaten their home, and always let them finish their coffee. The end.